Graham, hi, really great to speak with you today. Thank you so much for being up for this. And as a church, we at the moment are taking a fresh look at the fivefold functions and callings from Ephesians 4:11, and particularly in the way that they reflect the fullness of Christ, and how if we're flowing in that as a church, we can be representing the fullness of Christ within our community and in our lives, etc. And this week we're particularly taking a look at the apostolic, and I know that this is something that you're quite passionate about and very close to yourself, Graham. And I just wondered whether you might be able to just share with us, really in a nutshell, what would you describe the apostolic to be about, and kind of what gets you excited about that function and that calling for you, really?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks, Tim, for having us as well. It's great to join you all today. I think the word apostolic is such a big word that we've shied away from it a bit. And I think when you look at the fivefold ministry gifts that Christ gave us in Ephesians 4, the others are so easy to explain. You know, a prophet prophesies, a teacher teaches, a pastor or a shepherd looks after people, an evangelist goes and reaches the lost. But what does an apostle do? You know, and what is the apostolic? And in a nutshell, it is literally, the word literally means sent. And so, you know, so the Greek word apostolos is literally the word sent, and then you've got the Latin word missio for apostle, which is where we get our word missionary and mission from. And so I think in a nutshell, the whole thing of the apostolic and the apostle is all about movement. It's about going, it's about sending, it's about that sense of, you know, expansion and pioneering and that kind of big picture ethos. And so I think we've complicated it, and I don't think we need to. And so I would say in a nutshell, the apostolic is really all about being sent. It's about movement, and I think essential to the church, which I'm sure we'll come on to as we talk a bit more. I think for me personally, in terms of the apostolic gift, I think we've shied away from that to a degree, because I think we've always seen the apostle as the big guns, you know, the big superstar ministry, and I think that's not done the church a lot of good in the past, and possibly for those of us that have grown in sort of charismatic churches, we would have seen some of that. But I think, you know, we quite easily say, are you the pastor of the church? But we don't like to say, well, actually, no, I'm not. I'm actually an apostle. And it can come across as a bit of a grand word, and I think we shy away from that. But if your primary gifting is apostolic, why do we shy away from calling somebody an apostle, or, you know, a man or a woman, in my opinion? So, and I think one of the things that excites me about that is it can release you into your true calling, and therefore you can get on being who God has called you to be. And I think for me, the fresh look at the apostolic will release a lot more people into their God-given role. And I know that, you know, there's a question for today about how, when somebody sees themselves as that, what do we do? So we can come to that. So yeah, I think when you know what your primary gifting is, it releases you into your calling with real comfort, and therefore you can be who you're meant to be.
I think that's really helpful, actually, and I think we see that in some of the other gifts as well. So why is that such a vital function and ministry within the church, Graham? And also, I guess within any organisation, how does that apostolic impulse kind of show up, and how is that so vital for local church?
I think the whole apostolic ministry and gifting, you're right when you say it's not, I don't think it is just in the church. I think, you know, if you read people like Alan Hirsch, he would say the apostolic in the business world would be the entrepreneur, you know, the person that's wanting to move and push things forward. I think you know, funnily enough, since we've been in lockdown, I've been doing a fresh look at the book of Acts and doing a fresh study of the book of Acts. And it's really interesting that the apostle, in terms of a leadership gifting, is mentioned 80 times in the book of Acts, and the pastor or the shepherd is only mentioned 20. So I think if we're talking about, the importance of the apostolic in the local church, it's because it was the foundational gifting in the church, in the early church. And I think when you look at the whole nature of the apostolic, I think there are a number of things why that's important in the local church, because it releases certain things. So I think there is something key in prayer in the apostolic. So, when Paul talks to the Corinthian church and he talks about, we don't wage war against the flesh, but we wage war against divine strongholds. And he uses that word warfare there. The Greek word for warfare is the word strategia. And here's something fascinating. The literal meaning is to execute the apostolic. That's what that means, the word warfare. And I think part of the apostolic in the local church is about, through prayer, pulling down the strongholds in our communities. And, that's why I think that's one reason why I think it's so important. I think another area in the local church where the apostolic is so important is it develops mission more as a lifestyle rather than a project or an initiative. And I think when you've got an apostolic culture really flowing well in the life of the church, what you'll find is that mission and pioneering and reaching out starts to become the everyday in the life of the church. And so I think you get a renewed understanding of prayer in pulling down the strongholds, but I think mission comes into its own. I think another area would be the whole thing of creating a multiplying ethos. Sometimes I think we get a bit stuck on one or two things, but the apostolic gift in the church will create a multiplying ethos. I think the apostle is wired for expansion. I think the apostle drives the vision forward. I think the apostolic pushes out beyond the natural boundaries. It's part of the DNA of the apostolic gifting in the church. And I think when we develop a healthy apostolic culture in the life of your church, I think you'll find that people start to feel released, because there is a sense of mission in the blood and DNA of that local church, and therefore you get that sort of multiplying ethos. So I think there are two or three things there, and I think also whatever our theology is on healing, I think part of the apostolic, Jesus was the great apostle according to Hebrews 3 verse 1, and 2/3 of the Gospels are full of miracles and healings. Then you come to the new early church and you've got, many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. You come a little bit further on and it says that God used the hands of Paul to do many miracles. So I think whatever we think about healing and miracles, part of the apostolic is to see an increase of the supernatural. Definitely. I really think that. So I think that's another area of the apostolic in the local church. And then I guess, the whole equipping the saints for works of service. I think, that is very much part of the apostolic. How do we keep releasing people into an apostolic calling and apostolic ministry? So, yeah, I think we have complicated it too much. And I think we've given it such a big title that it's caused people to run away from it. And I think there's an opportunity today to release multiple apostolic giftings in our churches.
This is fantastic, and Graham, there's some new lenses there that you've given me just thinking about the apostolic, which has been extremely helpful. So how would an individual begin to recognise perhaps some of that apostolic impulse, perhaps in their own life, and what steps would you perhaps give to encouraging them to kind of really sort of develop that, really?
That's a brilliant question. It's one that we're grappling with a bit in our own local setting, because I think we could have multiple apostolic giftings in our churches. And what we want to recognise that and release them, because I think when we do, we'll see expansion. And so I think if somebody came to me and said, I'm feeling like there's an apostolic gifting emerging in my life, I'd probably go down the road with them of watching them. I often think that the apostolic gifting in somebody is they're always wanting to push the boundaries. They're always wanting to grow the thing. They're always wanting to go beyond. They're always wanting to pioneer. And I think if you've got those people in your church, you know, who can sometimes be annoying because they're coming to you and saying, I've got this real vision, I've got this real heart, I've got this, I'm burning inside of me for something new. I think probably if that's genuine, there's something of the apostolic in them. And I think rather than crush them or squash them, somebody once said to me, if you've got more than one gift in your church, what do you do? And I remember somebody saying, well, we'll create another lane then. You know, if you've got a motorway and it's congested all the time with traffic, the best way of getting a flow is to build another lane alongside it. And I think if we want to release more apostolic gifting in our churches, then let's create more lanes. And I think some of that is, let's get into multiplying, you know, maybe church planting or new expressions of the kingdom in our community, and then release those apostolic sort of visionaries and giftings within the church. So I think that's one thing. I think talk to somebody apostolic, glean from their gifting. I think read about it. You know, I think Alan Hirsch has done a brilliant online survey that you can do. All of our leadership team have done it. It's called the 5Q survey. It takes about half an hour, and I would really recommend that. It kind of shows you some of your primary gifting, and that's been really helpful for some of our guys.
That's right.
So yeah, some of that kind of stuff.
So Graham, talking about your guys and your context, obviously you're leading church and building church down in Suffolk in Diss. How have you been seeking to incorporate the apostolic within your church life, within your church structures, your teams, and recognizing perhaps those that are apostolic but not necessarily apostolic within the church, but out in entrepreneurial, you know, within the town, within the area. Just interested whether you, in closing, whether you might have one or two insights of how you're trying to work this out in your context.
Yeah, if I'm really honest, Tim, we're at the really early stage of that in terms of the church context. We're having some healthy discussions in our leadership team on the nature of the fivefold ministry gifts and beginning to recognize within the team those giftings. But I think where I would like to see that develop is to start to see the ministry gifts of Christ within every area of the life of the church. So take your children's team, for example. You know, we happen to have a vibrant children's ministry, and I look at that team and I can start to identify some of the kind of apostolic, prophetic, evangelistic, you know, shepherding giftings within that team. And so I think in the local church, right across every sphere of the church, could we start to recognize and identify real apostolic fivefold ministry giftings within the life of the church in multiple ways, absolutely multiple ways. And I think in the business world, so we have a young couple in our church that possibly will never be what we would call church leaders, but they are clearly apostolic. They've got this heart to develop young business people. They're entrepreneurial. They're expanding all of the time. You know, even in this lockdown period, they seem to be prospering as a business, you know, and I think there is a favor of God on some people in our communities that might not ever come within the walls of church leadership, but have this ability to be leaders and pioneers out in community. And I think as church leaders, we should champion that, and we should really help to release them to become the best business people, the best project leaders, the best managers, the best motivators in their workplace, in their businesses, as much as we possibly can. I think that is so, so important.
Graham, this has been so helpful to have this conversation with you, and it's definitely given us a lot to think about as we are also our end unpack what does this ministry function look like in our context of Huntingdon. So Graham, can I say thank you, and just God's blessing on everything that you're doing down in Suffolk. May you know that multiplication and that breakthrough that you're looking for, and we just want to speak blessing on you in Jesus' name. So Graham, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
And great to see you as well. Thanks for having us. It's been brilliant.
Cool.